Well, what's going wrong? From the German Institute for Economic Research, Ferdinand Fichtner joins us. Why can't Europe get growth back up to an acceptable level despite all of the reform and despite all of the austerity it's been going through?
Well, austerity is part of the story, obviously, in the sense that if fiscal expenditures are weak, as they currently are in the crisis countries, this obviously means that growth dynamics will be weak. But it's only part of the story in the sense that those countries really have to reinvent their growth models. If you think of the case of Spain, for example, a large part of the growth in the past was based on housing construction, and this basically fell apart. It simply doesn't happen anymore. And in this sense, they have to completely replace what happened in the past and create something new, and this simply doesn't happen overnight.
Well, those national differences, aren't they part and parcel of the EU's problems? If we take a look at Germany, Spain, Italy and Portugal, for example, you don't get much difference as far as growth goes in the first quarter. The graph paints an extremely telling picture of the vast economic discrepancies across the bloc. How can those very different ailments all be effectively treated with the same formula from the doctors in Brussels?
I think it's not the same formula they are prescribing for the countries. I think they look very much in detail into what is actually going wrong in Spain, in Greece, and there are different recipes. I think that's not the case. I think we have to be a bit considerate in the sense that there are some things which are easier dealt with, like fiscal policy, for example. That's something a national government can immediately influence, while other things, reforms to the labor market, for example, they simply take much longer and therefore take much longer to have a result.
But at some stage the blame has to fall back on the technocrats in Brussels, and it looks like that's exactly what's happened in this election.
In a way, it probably happened, and I fully understand that people in the crisis countries in Southern Europe are worried about the current situation, are worried about the labor market situation, for example. I don't know if it's really fair to blame the guys in Brussels for that, but this is certainly what happened, and the election results in this sense are a warning.
We'll have a listen to this quote. The French president says, for many citizens, Brussels has become remote and incomprehensible.
There is a truth to that in the sense that democratic legitimation for European policymakers is very weak, and that is part of the problem as well. If people in Athens have the feeling that they cannot influence what is going on in Brussels and have to obey to rules which are coming from Brussels, this will certainly stir uneasiness about this current situation.
And EU leaders have been preaching austerity, and yet the monster that we know in Brussels, they don't work in one language, they don't even work in the one city. I mean, very inefficient.
Well, that's also unfair. I think if you think first about the number of civil servants the EU has, it's much less than the German government, for example, has. So, in a way, they are not so inefficient. Of course, there is inefficiency involved if you integrate 27 different countries with, I don't know, maybe 24 different languages. That, of course, it induces inefficiencies, but it's in a way normal and part of this integration process.
But is it normal in Strasbourg, the inefficiencies there? Buildings are empty for 317 days of the year.
No, that's probably a problem. I agree with that we don't need this building in Strasbourg. But that's, again, part of the European policy-making process that the guys in France will never accept, that Strasbourg is cut down.
What about this feeling of leaving the bloc at the moment that's been brought up in both France and Britain? Could that get stronger?
I guess it could get stronger, and we'll see it get stronger in Britain, definitely. I'm not sure if the results of the Front National in France are really, if the voters really want to tell us that they want to leave Europe. I think once this decision comes closer, they will be more reluctant, because in the end, the losses for the respective countries will be much bigger than for the European Union. There will be losses involved for the European Union as well. If we lose France or UK, it will be damaging, but it will be much worse for the leaving countries.
The French say they'd roll out the red carpet to British investors if the UK opted out of the EU. How much would that help? Just briefly.
In a way, it would help. I mean, what we need is investment in the European countries, and in particular in the crisis countries. And if it's the right investment which helps to stimulate reinventing those economies, what we said before, then it can contribute to a better performance of those countries.
OK, something that France could need right now. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.